So continuing on with part 2, we're discussing how Abu Ismail left a crucial point out regarding the history behind Hagia Sophia. It was built in 537 AD and until 1453 when it was conquered. It served as an, before that previously, it served as an Eastern Orthodox cathedral and the Patriarch of Constantinople, except between 1204 and 1261. Let's see what happened between these two dates. It says, when it was converted by a Fourth Crusade to a Catholic cathedral under the Latin Empire. OMG. Look at this, folks. This is a Christian Fourth Crusade who actually did a crusade and fought and captured this Constantinople church, and it actually converted to what? Catholicism. So much for your crusades, Abu Ismail. Your crusades took over a different sect of Christianity, which is the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox. It took over this particular church by force and it converted it to Catholicism. Now, what are you going to say about that part of the history of Hagia Sophia, which you conveniently left out? Why did you do that? I mean, I'm baffled. I mean, is that because it's a Christian organization? It's a Catholic organization that by the Latin Empire that actually converted that Orthodox cathedral into Catholicism? Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I'm not making an excuse for Islam coming over and taking over, but Abu Ismail seems to suggest that it's Islam and Muslims taking over these cathedrals and turning them into mosques. Yet we have now in the records Christian sects and denominations taking over particular Christian churches that are a different sect than them and then converting them into their own sect of Christianity. I mean, talk about one Christian denomination hijacking another. Just imagine if a Sunni Muslims hijacked a Shia mosque and converted to Sunni Islam. Imagine what the Christians would have said. Furthermore, just imagine today's Protestant movement do a third crusade in Italy and take over the cathedral square and remove Catholicism in the Roman Church and establish it for one which is Protestant. Well, that's exactly what Catholicism did with Hagia Sophia when it converted it away from Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy. I mean, how hypocritical is that? Like I said, folks, it's very, very, very complex, the issues there. There were many religions and many exchanges happened. You know, as for the Christians being overtaken by the Muslims in Turkey and Hagia Sophia, this could be because the Christians abandoned them and the country after defeat by the Ottoman Empire, meaning the Christians were given an option to stay under Islamic rule, pay the jizya, or they are banished from the land if they break that covenant. And if the Ottomans did wrong by taking over that church, even if Christians wanted to stay and worship, then this would be the fault of the Ottomans and not exactly the Quran or the Islam. But like I said, the issue is very complex, and to finger point at the Ottoman will be absolutely nonsensical. In fact, when we go into history, apparently it says that majority of the Greek Orthodox actually converted to Islam, which could mean that majority wanted the church to be converted to an Islamic one since they now had a new faith. Now remember, this isn't really breaking the covenant that Prophet Muhammad actually wrote, because if those the Orthodox actually converted to Islam as a majority and they wanted their particular church to be converted into a mosque, then what is the problem with that? Can you imagine in Australia, for example, you know, we have the Australian Christians, they all convert to Islam and then they start wanting the Khilafah of that country to actually help them change the churches into mosques. There's no issue in that because that's what the people want. So it's possible that because majority of the Greek Orthodox converted to Islam, that could be a reason why Hagia Sophia was actually converted at the time. And by the way, folks, it's actually turned into a museum now. So it's not really even a place of worship. You can read here, I've posted the source from Wikipedia, and it shows you the source in references 1 and 2. It says, the majority of the city's inhabitants were converted to Islam from their original Eastern Orthodox Christian faith. So there you have it. That could be a possible reason why the majority actually wanted that particular church converted to a mosque. As you can see, where I've outlined it in blue in the text, that's what the history tells us. Now, the Wikipedia link also says that other churches were denigrated and desecrated, but this may be a reason why. Apparently, Christian heretics persecuted by Patriots of Constantinople, Jerusalem, Alexandria, or Antioch were now free and safe under a Muslim rule that found their disputes quite unintelligible. In the 9th century, the Muslim governor of Antioch appointed a special guard to keep Christian sects from massacring one another at the church monasteries, and numerous flourished under the skeptical Umayyads. The Arabs admired the work of the monks in agriculture and reclamation. So as you can see, it was the Christians who were actually killing one another, and that's why those churches were desecrated and actually destroyed, and not necessarily the Seljuks or the Ottoman Empire. And we've also given you proof and evidence that there was a time frame where the Eastern Orthodox sect of Christianity, who withheld and had control of Hagia Sophia, was overtaken by Catholicism, which actually came and converted Hagia Sophia into Catholicism. So there was also clashes amongst Christians in places of sanctuary. So does Abu Ismail like to mention those facts? No, he actually conveniently left that out and tried to blame the Ottoman Empire for it. Amazing. And this source that I mentioned, where the Muslim governor of Antioch appointed a special guard to keep Christian sects from massacring one another, is found in Will Durant, The Story of Civilization, The Age of Faith, Volume 4, pages 208 to 219. And I'll put the hyperlink below this video and you can see it for yourself. Have a look at this quote from Yusuf Qardawi, Al-Qaliyat Al-Dinya Wal-Hala Islami, page 56-57. It says, they, the Turks, allowed all of them, Roman Catholics and Greek Orthodox, to preserve their religion and follow their consciences as they choose. They allowed them their churches to perform their sacred rituals in Constantinople and many other places. This is on the contrast to what I can testify to from living in Spain for 12 years. Not only were we forced to attend their Papist celebrations, but our lives and their lives of our grandchildren were in danger also. So there you go, folks. You can see how the Christians were actually persecuted in Spain. But as you can see, that when they came living under the Turks and so forth, that the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox were allowed to be preserved in their religions and their rituals. So as you can see, there were rights given under Muslim dhimmis, and their rights were according to Islam and the Sharia of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran, where they were allowed to practice their religion freely. And as I said, the situation of Hagia Sophia was so complex that there were Christians killing one another, converting it here and there, and in the end you can see that majority were the Greek Eastern Orthodox, who with a possibility wanted that particular church to convert to Islam, and of course their rights were given, as Yusuf al-Qaradawi puts it on page 56 to 57. Now you may say, oh, well, that history is distorted. That's just a part of Islamic history. But then again, you use Islamic history to make a testification to prove your point, Mr. Abu Ismail. So no dirty tricks here when you try and claim, oh, that's part of Muslim history. You can't just pick and choose. That's inconvenience and that's double standards. Let's continue.
The answer to my initial question is clearly no. Your non-Muslim parents would not be free to go pray in the local synagogue or church of an Islamic state, simply because those buildings would most likely be destroyed or converted into mosques, not to mention the other potential dangers they might encounter there. So think about that before you make the mistake of converting to Islam. For more information about...
Well, as you can see, Abu Ismail has been clearly refuted that if you were a non-Muslim and you lived under an Islamic state, a proper Islamic state, then as long as you pay the jizya and you pay your taxes, your houses and your sanctuary of worship will be safe and you can worship in them. As Umar ibn Khattab has said, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's letter has said, that your places of worship are sanctified and their crosses are not to be taken or destroyed, and that's what the literature says. But Abu Ismail does not mention that in his video. No. He will not mention it because he's a deceitful liar who has not studied Islam properly, or if he has studied, he has conveniently left it out just to manipulate the text and lie about Islamic history. Now, I'd like to go to another point. Let's talk about invasions. I mean, look at the Bush administration. When he spoke about invading Iraq, he spoke about it being a crusade. Yes, it was a crusade. In fact, there were evangelical missionaries that were, because they're fair-skinned, blonde and blue eyes, and the Middle Easterners are usually more dark-toned skins, black hair. They used to get dressed up looking like Middle Easterners, and they'll go out and hand Bibles, but the covers would be Qur'ans, but when you open them up, they're actual Bibles inside of them. This is what Christian masses did in Iraq under the Crusade. We're talking about crusades, the Fourth Crusade, the Third Crusade, the Second Crusade. No, we've got something called modern day crusade, and it still continues. Don't ever be deceived. And they did this in Iraq, handing out Bibles, trying to evangelize the place. In fact, there's even a video online that shows American soldiers shooting and desecrating mosques. Let's have a look. You can hear the call of prayer coming from that masjid. You can hear the call of prayer, yeah? That's the adhan. And the American soldiers are shooting at the minaret because that's where the adhan is coming from. Listen to them. You can go watch the whole video for yourself. I'll post it below. And they're actually celebrating it in it too when they're shooting at the minaret. So according to statistics, it says that more than 80 to 90% of the Christian army, the American army, consists of Christians. So these are the Christians, the Crusaders, what they're doing, desecrating. But of course, Abu Ismail won't talk about that. But would it be accurate for me to say, look, this represents Christianity? That's what Abu Isa does. He picks out the Ottomans or certain individuals of what they did and says, oh, look, this is Islam. So it's just really hypocritical. I mean, we could play the same game with him. I mean, look at Australia and America, for example. Look how they were invaded. When the colonialists came to Australia, did they come leaving their churches behind in England? No, they came here killing the native people of the land, and they built their monasteries and their churches. They were running a crusade for world domination. They came to America, they went to the Indies, they went to America, they went to Africa, and that's how they evangelized the world. So just in case he wants to claim, oh, it was the Ottomans who invaded other lands to spread Islam, when, of course, all empires do it. They go to countries to rule it under their Sharia or under the Christian secular Sharia, and what they do is they build their mosques there or they build their churches there, and in some cases, they may take over those temples, just as we've seen Christian history do that, and we saw Islamic history do that, and it may have very good reasons for doing so. Like I said, that the people wanted it, or at times where the people abandoned it and never wanted it under Islamic rule, so they abandoned it and it was taken over. See, Abu Ismail wanted to make it sound like, hey, the Muslims came there, did not give the Christians any option, and said, we're closing this down and we're breaking it down. But of course, it doesn't even reflect upon that. And Hagia Sophia actually sits there. Has it been denigrated and destroyed? No, there was only modifications made to it. Was the Jewish holy cities and mosques and sanctuaries destroyed? No, there were adjustments made to it to accompany the Muslims as well at the time. So again, him talking about destroying, ripping down crosses and conflating that to ISIS, he's just ridiculous and absurd. He actually walked in Hagia Sophia and he saw it was a beautiful monument. You know, Abu Ismail always likes to conflate it. It was the Muslims who invaded Istanbul and Constantinople and so forth, and it took over the Eastern Orthodox churches and so forth, but he doesn't know his history at all. The site of Istanbul, Constantinople, has been a site of human settlement for over 3,000 years, whereas the Thracians only arrived between the 13th to the 11th century, most likely displaced the original inhabitants of the area. The Greeks arrived from Greece even later in the 7th century and were not the original indigenous inhabitants of Anatolia. The Greeks, Greco-Romans, were only the most recent foreigners to claim and usurp the land by conquest or hold it by oppressive force of arms. It is known that of the original peoples of Anatolia, the Hittites are the most ancient known indigenous inhabitants of the area, dating back to 1600 BCE. So, as you can see clearly, given the above, one may be able to argue that after the demise of their empire, the loss of their homeland remained in the collective memory of those remnants of the indigenous population who later mixed with Phoenicians and Syro-Arabs, Seljuk Turks, and other indigenous and non-indigenous peoples who later over time accepted Islam and returned along with the Turkish Ottomans, impelled to reclaim their rightful property from the Greeks who had stolen it from them so long before. Again, I'm not justifying injustice and so forth, but saying it was reclaimed, it was heritage by the Greeks is nonsensical because they weren't the indigenous inhabitants of those lands. So like I said, the situation of Anatolia is absolutely complicated, and there are many number of facts or complex issues that could be the reason why Hagia Sophia was recaptured. But one must realize that the long and complicated course of history didn't just begin yesterday with Sultan Mehmed II in his capture of Hagia Sophia. Them blaming Mehmed II, I think that the Christians are ashamed of their own violent and bloody history and therefore feel the need to portray Muslim history as being just as aggressive and violent as their own in order to equal the playing field. But it seems that the Christians were the initial agitators, and if that is the case, then why should Muslims condemn the Ottoman state for engaging in what could easily be described as self-defense against the Christian aggressions? If you insist on demanding that Muslims condemn past grievances and that you want to conflate Muslims with Islam and so forth, then we can also demand that Christians condemn their own violent history as well, recommended by the Holy Spirit. Do you condemn, as a Christian, the Byzantine conquests and the oppressive rule of Syro-Arab lands and North Africa? Do you condemn the Crusades, all 9 of them? Do you condemn the occupation and brutal rule of Muslim lands for over 200 years by Christian crusades? Do you condemn the Crusades of Weimar? Do you condemn Christian-backed colonialist imperialists of the past? Do you condemn the rape and slavery of non-Christian peoples who were victims of that imperialism? Do you condemn the modern Western and incursions into Muslim lands and countries? And you could just go on and on. The clergy abused 4,444 victims have been there since the establishment of the colonialists in Australia after they built their churches here, destroyed the native land and destroyed the people of this land, raped their children under the cross, under the church. And don't give me this nonsense, it wasn't done under the church. Your Christian crusaders came to Australia and built their monasteries and churches and took over the Navy land. Do we now call that bloody Christian history according to the teachings of the Bible? Maybe we can. According to Luke 19:27, Jesus says, and this is according to John Gill's commentary, that when he returns in his second coming, he will destroy the enemies who try to disown him and so forth. That's according to Luke 19:27, and the commentary says that this parable is an actual reality that will take place in Jesus' second coming. That's according to John Gill's tafsir. He's a Christian scholar. So maybe that there will be another crusade and Jesus will force those to convert to Jesus. And if they don't convert, he will desecrate them, destroy their temples and churches, and whatever, convert them to Christianity. So maybe we can make a relationship between the two, that the Christian colonials and the Crusaders are doing now the will of Jesus. And now they're actually waiting for him to come down from Jerusalem in the sky. They're waiting for him now. So according to Luke 19:27, can we now make a parallel between the Crusades and what they did to America and Australia and Africa? Could we now relate that and what they're doing now in Jerusalem, killing the poor Palestinians, and all the Christians are actually supporting the Zionist state of Israel? Are they now fulfilling Jesus? Because apparently Islam is the Antichrist. They're all fighting against Muslims. Are they now preparing that way for Jesus to finish the job off in Luke 19:27, to reign over them and destroy them, as the commentary says? Now, it's interesting because there are Christians who say, oh, it was a defensive crusade. It was a defensive crusade. Yeah, it was a defensive crusade. Read 1 Samuel verses 15-3. It says that swords were stuck into babies. How is that a defensive crusade when you're sticking swords into babies? That's what your biblical scripture says. It was defensive crusade. Yes, it was the Aboriginal people who were attacking the British, but it was your Christian modern day crusaders who came here to massacre the people and build their churches. How is that a defensive modern day crusade? And don't give me this nonsense, it wasn't Christian. It was Christian. Your Christians came here and built their churches. If the Muslims did the same, you'd say, oh, the Muslims came and invaded Australia and they built their mosques here. Wouldn't you say that? See, guys, I can play the same game with Abu Ismail even more forcefully. We can play it better. Thank you for listening. It has been fantastic Great responses and great rebuttals. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to God. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep guiding the non-Muslims into Islam and help us in our struggle to defeat the liars bi-idhnillah. Please subscribe, stay in tune for more videos in exposing the liar, the deceitful liar who claims to be a Muslim for 16 years. Sure.